Picking up from Nori, like you said, we are the problem. But we should not forget the fact that we are nature. We are equally part of nature. And being part of nature, we have to make sure that there is a harmony with our actions. We should be harmonious and friendly in the actions that we do. At a point, as a conservationist, during studies, I was thinking that education, it makes me to think that animals and trees at times are more important than human beings. But in the course of putting practice into reality, I came to discover that there is a blend, and we need, it's a win-win situation. For plants and animals to survive, for man to survive, plants and animals must be existing. And for plants and animals to survive, human must be there. So there must be this harmony. And that is why we are pushing this element of nature-based solutions in my country, and we are looking at it from both the top-bottom and bottom-top approach. But government policies are there, but at the same time, we need the communities. And that is why, in all my interventions in terms of nature-based solutions, my focus is what is the space of the community in this situation? And how are the communities being involved, and how do they participate in protecting the nature? Because I was just talking, like I keep talking with South Poles and the rest, we look at policies in taking decisions, yeah, but at the same time, we should look at the interests of the local man, the people who live side by side these animals and plants. So we are looking at nature-based solutions as not just protecting the nature, but at the same time providing ecosystem services that will help the community.
Thank you very much. I think you are bringing up a very important point, and I think I will come back to Ronald. He has said that we need harmony, so it's building from what Megan said to what the Lord Deputy Mayor said and to what Harrison have just said now. We need harmony. So what I want to ask you is, how do we then leverage these nature solutions in such a way that at least incentives can flow towards them? Because there are no incentives. And the truth is, when there are no incentives or the incentives are minimal, people are not going to still see value in this. 2 minutes, please.
2 minutes, okay. So, South Pole is primarily a developer and a trader of carbon credit projects. I mean, that's the fundament of our business model. We develop projects that have a measurable mitigation impact, and we finance and trade those. But I don't think that it means that we're not interested in developing a resilience and an adaptation outcome for our projects. And I think we're increasingly seeing that we're building in exactly those incentives and thinking in a multi-framework kind of approach. It gives us a product which is actually more marketable. People want to see something which is not just reducing greenhouse gases, but is actually delivering benefits for biodiversity, sustainable development, something which targets the empowerment of vulnerable groups. And it makes for a project which is welcomed at the field level and then can be sustained for perpetuity. So I don't know if I agree fully that those incentives aren't there, but I think we're trying to get better at actually quantifying those and tailor-making them to a very specific context.
Yeah, let me just follow up, and I think I'm starting this follow-up with you because the next speaker is a young person. Everybody is young at heart, or also young in terms of age. This is a group that if they don't see what is in it for them, the sustainability of what they do might not necessarily. So how do you see the informal sector and young people? What incentives are there for them within this space of nature-based solutions?
So I think the incentive is only present if you've got a stake in ownership. You have to, and when I say you, I'm saying the groups that we actually want to accept our projects or any of our initiatives, they have to have some stake in ownership. It's got to be something which is led by their incentives, which speaks to their needs. So something which delivers jobs, which contributes to infrastructure. You don't want to feel like you're on the outside of that process, or you're not going to feel like you've got a stake in owning it or having a sense of pride in it. So I think that's, I'm going to say historically, that's not a thing that development groups or government or the private sector have been particularly good at. But I think we're starting to see how our efforts are undermined if we don't build that in from the start.
Excellent. That is a very good point that you're making. At least I'll come to you before I come back to Richard. There is a lot of work that WWF is doing. And building on what Roland has said, of course there are incentives that do exist out there, but we don't really see a lot of them. Is it that the lessons and the projects that are implemented are not showcased to be able to attract more incentives, or is that once they end, they end? How is WWF? What lessons in 2 minutes can you be able to share about that?
Thank you so much, Dr. Richard, for that. Since we are building on each other's talks, so I'm also going to do the talks that have been said here. So at the WWF Africa Adaptation Hub, we are looking at how we could value the role of nature to drive innovative and transformative adaptation actions on the ground. And through that, we are looking at...
you said the rule of...
Sorry?
You use a word. You said the rule, you are liberating the rule of...
We are valuing nature in order to drive innovative and transformative adaptation actions on the ground. And what we are currently we're looking at 5 main pillars. The first one is capacity building and being a knowledge hub in the region. Specifically, we are focusing on showcasing our documents around nature-based solutions for adaptations and tools, and we are also organizing capacity building on climate change adaptation and nature-based solutions for adaptation. And one important thing as well is how we as Africa, how can we work together as Africans? How can we create a Pan-African coalition to drive these innovative and transformative adaptation actions, blending both indigenous and traditional knowledge, because this is something, nature is part of our culture, and it is very important for us to blend this indigenous and traditional knowledge when we are pushing adaptation interventions around nature-based solutions on the ground. And I also think that the definition on nature-based solutions is also important. We need to really have a common narrative around the definition of nature-based solutions, and start from our region. So thank you.
Excellent. Very important points. Nature-based solutions cannot be implemented without leveraging on indigenous knowledge. I think before I come back to you, Richard, Dr. Benedict is online, so I'll go to you, Dr. as they say in Swahili. Research is very important, generate data, because data can help inform policy. I would appreciate to hear from you in 2 minutes how the data you are generating is leveraging indigenous knowledge that can help take nature-based solutions forward. If you can hear us, please. 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Richard, and I hope you can hear me. So I'm assuming there's a thumbs up, but yes, you can hear me, and a panel and the floor can hear me. Thank you so much for this opportunity as I quickly dash through my 2 minutes. So I agree with what all the panelists have said, and so one of the ways is actually ensuring that alternative and other knowledge systems are included in the research process. This is co-production of research, co-production of knowledge, and this is the way for transforming nature and introducing nature-based solutions. This allows for buy-in and uptake and capacity building through the process, and also finding novel methodologies such arts-based methodologies as an example in the inclusion of discovering pathways to implement and change policies, and to also then develop these particular nature-based solution opportunities. It also builds capacity. So I really think that through research, through data production, it's not talking at or to as scientists. It's actually co-producing knowledge with the lived experiences and the historical knowledge that is already contained in Africa, which is deep and rich, which I think already offers great solutions that research is not only going to contribute to. So this co-production actually provides those opportunities.
Yeah, thank you very much, Benedict. To still stay on there, I want to do a follow-up question since you are online at the moment. You have stressed on data and and indigenous knowledge. And when you look across the continent today, indigenous knowledge mainstreaming in formal academic training remains limited. What's your take on this? What can make this to change? Because knowledge that we know that works is not part and parcel of academic curricula across the entire continent. Do you have any suggestion that you can make?
Well, I think first of all, through our attempts, in particular in academia, to decolonize curricula is one of the steps in the right direction. The other is also our research approaches and methodologies need to, for want of a different way, become owned and part and parcel of Africa. So we need to realize that we live as researchers, each and every single one of us. We make decisions every single day based on knowledge and data moving forward. And inherently, we talk about youth. We have to keep on proving the value of nature, but actually when you speak with people and the knowledge that's there, the value of nature is known. Particularly youth, they know the value of nature. They want to participate, and therefore I think we need to look at ways and mechanisms for amplifying these voices in the decision-making processes going forward.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Benedict. And keyword there, decolonizing curriculum to make sure that at least what works becomes the norm is key. Richard, I will go to you. You work with real communities, and you've heard Benedict indicate that taking indigenous knowledge from, because nature-based solutions, they're not new to these communities. They've been using organic farming. They've been using agroforestry techniques. There's really nothing new to them. But sometimes we do not get the knowledge on how they leverage that for quite a very long time, but we want to introduce something that is not even working for them. So how have you managed in working with communities to ensure that at least you can build on what they do?
Thank you very much. I think the term nature-based solutions will reserve to communities, indigenous people. But these are very real techniques that they are using. They've been using time immemorial, and it's very important for us to define or clearly define nature-based solutions in the African context or at the community context, because we are making this seem so new and so technical and so different, and it makes it difficult to make community people or young people in the local communities better understand nature-based solutions, something they already know, something they are already applying, something they are already living with, and that is a challenge. Also, communities are less empowered, or there are no incentives, as was mentioned earlier on, to support what they do. So in my organization, what we'll do is to provide support to communities, to young people especially, because we're a youth organization, we work with young people, to support the local climate solutions that they are driving at the local level by creating the avenue for them to have direct access to funders, to donors, to people who can support them. Also leveraging on how they can actively participate in decision-making processes in the country.
Excellent. Very good point. These are not new solutions from your words, and these have been echoed across the panel. That then still means there is something that is still missing. So it's terminology, sometimes confusing, and I think as Alice said, the Pan-African coalition is needed, and I think I'll come back to you. We'll take another round then before I get back to the podium here, because this is getting very interesting. I mean, cities, 90% of the food that actually is consumed in cities come from informal sector. And what I want to ask you here is, what role do you see such informal food producers or traders playing in enhancing the uptake of NBS in food? Because we cannot talk about NBS, especially everybody consumes food, everybody eats every day. But most of the people are moving to the cities. So to what extent, maybe through the work that you guys are doing, have you come up with solutions or proposals that you think that can actually become the norm for ensuring that food systems can actually become strengthened? And then on top of that, if you can just give out some pathways maybe that ICLEI is using, that would be helpful. 2 minutes.
Thanks, Richard. Let me start with the first part of the question and then go to the 3 pathways that we're working on. I think the first thing to say is that we often underestimate how organized informal communities are. I can remember we started a project along the Nalonge River working with the market community there, where the majority of the waste going into the river and polluting it was organic waste. And we went into the market community to have conversations, and in hindsight, stupidly from our perspective, thought we would help organize the system and get a system going in that market, when in fact when we went there, it was completely organized. There were heads of the different sectors in the market, there was a leader of the entire market, and it was really about us listening and harnessing that existing organization to co-produce, as the colleague online spoke about, to co-produce a solution that made sense in that context. So I think also what I'm hearing from the panelists is much more about us who think we might be technical experts listening and less dictating in this space, because it's been done for thousands of years. Then just quickly on pathways, I wanted to also just paint a bit of a more optimistic picture, not that there's not a lot for us to do, but from ICLEI's perspective, we are making progress. We represent local governments and regions within the CBD process, which is the similar one to the UNFCCC for climate. And there's widespread uptake from all nations that cities have a vital role to play in dealing with the biodiversity crisis. And we've established things like the Cities with Nature platform, where cities around the world are signing up and committing to biodiversity actions. I was really challenged yesterday, in fact, by a session with one of the high-level champions around accountability, though, because we are seeing commitments being made to SDGs, we've seen commitments through Cities with Nature, with Cities in Nature, we see commitments from national governments through NDCs, but we need to ensure, and business, ESG, massive field, we need to make sure there's accountability in these commitments. We owe that to the youth and the people that are working in this space. Second part I just wanted to touch on is around planning. We can't be doing planning for planning's sake anymore. And where we found success, and I can give an example where we've done work in Dar es Salaam, is developing a thematic asset that looks at what are the most biodiverse areas in that particular city and using that to prioritize implementation projects. So planning right from the outset needs to be linked to implementation. And then final pathways around finance. We've done lots of demonstration projects, small scale as ICLEI, and I'm sure many panelists here have also seen wonderful nature-linked solutions happening on the continent. Now we need scale. And the call from our perspective is that we should be using grant finance. You spoke, Richard, about 86% of nature-based solutions finance coming from the private sector. That should be used as bridging finance to move a nature-based solutions project from something that's not financially viable to something that is financially viable, not just grant finance forever.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And this signal, when you see me starting to hold my mic, you just do like Megan has done. That would be wonderful. Roland, I will get back to you. You hearing Megan is talking about being organized, right? And if you look across the continent, there are structures that are not leveraged. There are cooperatives, there are youth groups, there are initiatives, like in Kenya they call it chamas, in Central Africa, Cameroon, where I come from, they call it tontings or njangis. I believe across the continent there are those structures. But why are they, what do you think needs to be done? Because why I'm asking this question is to build from the perspective, if you do not leverage on organized structures, you might not be able to bring impact to scale. And regardless of the incentives that are put in place, of course things will be done, but they will end up going nowhere. Do you have a perspective that can be leveraged to ensure this starts happening?
Sure. I think you're right, Richard, that there has been a lot done to establish some of those necessary structures. They're not necessarily always fit for purpose, depending what we want to do with them. So an example, Harrison and I were talking a little bit earlier today about the possibility of how do we kickstart a carbon finance project in the forests of Cameroon. And in that example, the policy of the Cameroonian government is to decentralize forest management to community-based structures. That's terrific. Tick. We want that in place. And the standard tenure period is for 25 years. Sounds fantastic, but in fact that is just 5 years too short to be accepted by the carbon standards, because there's the principle of wanting to know that that carbon asset or that forest management plan has got long-term tenure. So that's a simple thing of a stroke of a pen, but that stroke of a pen has gone out and dished out rights to community forests for 25 years across the board, and we see that model being borrowed in many other countries. So although that structure is in place and that sort of mechanism for engaging or consulting with those communities are there, there's a need to align that at least to what our own sector does. And an alternative example might be in establishing agricultural cooperatives. Sometimes they're there in place, but you might have in one district it's a farmers association, in another it is a rice growers cooperative. The pieces do not always match. We're not always using the same metrics. So, a common theme is that we really need to get better at talking to each other across the silos, right?
Right. Talk to each other across the silos. Richard, there are a lot of silos in the continent. We have so many youth groups. Youth leading one, which is a good thing. I mean, young people are doing, like you are, they're doing a lot of great work across the continent. And I'll go back to what Ali said. Establishing a Pan-African approach to addressing some of these aspects within the nature-based space. And you said something, Richard, that was important. These terminologies keep confusing even the actors on the ground. We move from climate-smart agriculture to nature-based solution, but at the end of the day, they're the same things. So the question I want to ask, there are two-fold aspects to it. One is, how do we ensure collective action among actors on this space of nature-based, especially the youth, because everybody have an initiative, and sometimes they don't work together. The second is, what attracts youth in this case is cash, right? If they don't see money in anything, they are not really going to go into that. So what do you think needs to be done beyond asking government, but within the youth, to ensure that at least we can take this to the next level? If you can handle that in 2 minutes, you will win a medal.
Thank you very much. I think that the first thing we must acknowledge that young people are very dispersed. Even in my country, Ghana, the government is always saying there are so many young people doing different things. So how do we meet? Because we meet one youth group and the other saying we were not called to the table, so you didn't meet youth group. So one of the things that we identified with this challenge was to establish the Youth Climate Council, which is not an organization but an institutional mechanism to support the youth climate movement in the country, to bring together youth organizations, youth-led organizations, young people individually across the country. Currently, we have over 1,500 young people registered with us, and we don't actually lead much more, but create that space for them to have that direct interaction with all the service providers that they want to engage. And that is one of the avenues we've used to address this problem in Ghana. And we are trying to replicate the same problem, the same solution in Kenya and in Uganda as well. We are also trying to pilot in Nigeria currently. And yes, to also come to the next, which you talked about.
30 seconds. Yes.
The next part.
The next part was that what do we need to do to ensure that at least youth start seeing money in this? Because this is an aspect that if you don't showcase what is in it for a youth, the reality is they're not going to be in it.
Yeah, in 30 seconds. No, young people, when you look at the youth-led actions, they are very innovative and they are very impactful. And we tend to focus more on the impact. And whilst we are looking at having money to finance what we are doing, where there is a lack is how we are able to make a business case for the actions that we are taking on the ground, so that the financial providers would see the financial viability in terms of the sustainability of the impact that we are making, and also to scale up that in not only project implementation but also in financial management as well.
Excellent. It looks there is a lot happening, right? And the youth council aspect that you mentioned, a lot, Deputy Mayor. I want to be very, very practical now, because you said something that was very important. You are an activist, you are a human rights activist, you are tired of hearing things that do not align with reality. And what I want to build on is what Benedict said, that we should decolonize curriculum. But my question to you is not on that, is when you look at Kampala, there are floods most of the time. These are realities and facts that we see every day. And this flooding is becoming a climate risk factor in all African cities. I think, Megan, you will attest to this. So how best is Kampala municipality addressing this, using nature-based solutions, if at all that exists? And I'd like to follow up again on that, so that at least you can use 3 minutes to quickly answer that. How are you engaging the public-private sector in the course of doing this? If you can use 2 minutes, that would be amazing.
Well, I'll try, and I think that question is indeed direct. It is true that now for a very long time, actually, for Kampala, when it rains, in 2 minutes, the whole city will be flooded. Uganda is known for some things, but Kampala is specifically known for that. My colleagues from Uganda here also know that when it threatens to rain, power will immediately go off. Those are some of the things that are unfortunately associated with my country. And to answer this, we need to understand what is the cause of this flooding. The cause of this flooding is that nature has been tampered with. And just this week and last week, NEMA swung into action, and they were arresting and demolishing structures of those that are building in wetlands. Now the question is, which people are being targeted? Now the people that are being targeted are those that can hardly afford a meal a day. The people that are being targeted are those that can hardly find means of survival. And these are people that have been chased from one place and then they move to another. Those that have money are merely being protected by those that are supposed to chase them from wetlands. And as policymakers, we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place. Should I protect the untouchables, or I should speak, or I should equally protect the touchables because they have no one to speak for them, and therefore, as a policymaker, I have to speak on their behalf. So the challenge is, if the government was starting with the untouchables, then probably the touchables would also agree to leave these places free of charge. Number two, the other cause of flooding is we have a lot of garbage that is not collected. As Kampala Capital City Authority, we are only able to collect 56% of the garbage generated. Now, where does the rest of the garbage go? Definitely, this is the garbage that blocks the pipes, and therefore it ends up to flooding. And of course, as a local council, we rely largely on central government. And I was telling our colleague that even when we collect money as the authority, this money goes to the consolidated fund, to the central government. And therefore, you find the priorities of the national government are quite different from the priorities of the local government. That as a city, we only have 10 garbage collection tractors. And we are talking about a city that has 99 parishes. So there's that weakness that we cannot self-sustain ourselves, and as local councils, we are not independent. And at times, of course, when dialogue fails, the citizens have to raise up to show that there is need for solutions to be formed.
Thank you very much, Lord Deputy Mayor, for those great insights. That was quite very inspiring, and the way you put it. Those who are poor sometimes are not poor because they choose to be poor, and so they end up doing things that are not right, not because they want to do them knowing that they are not right, just because they want survival. And I want to go to you, Harrison, which is now really an aspect that all the panelists have touched. You've just heard the mayor, you've heard panelists mention this. Without having alternatives, there is absolutely no way that nature-based solutions will become part and parcel of transformational development, because the forest will be destroyed. The dumping of waste to be able to cause flooding and all those things will, because there are no alternatives. So in the work that you do, which alternatives have been put in place? And if you can, in 2 minutes, handle this, that would be helpful.
Thank you again, Richard. The first thing I want to emphasize here is we always, I want to talk like my colleague, the earlier speaker talked about decolonizing. I talk about decolonizing nature-based solution technology. Because we talk about alternative decolonizing nature-based solution technologies. Now, we always want to import technology and knowledge to the community people, which does not work. I always like moving away from the aspect of alternatives. I prefer we improve on what the people already are doing. We improve on what they are doing and bring technology on what they are doing. By so doing, they find themselves within the same space and improving to where and going to where we want them to go. But when you bring alternative, you need to start bringing a whole lot of technology, a lot of capacity building, of which some of these people are not educated. Now, that is why one of the approaches we are using is blending the indigenous knowledge into planning documents. We work with councils like the mayors by me, because my country, Cameroon, has a decentralized system where natural resources are managed now at the level of the council. Our tree planting activities, our agricultural activities, we integrate them into planning documents, and our approach is doing participatory mapping, community participatory mapping, community land use planning, and integrating this land use planning and community participatory mapping into council development plans that are carrying out, implementing development projects on behalf of the council. So the approach is not bringing alternative, but improving on the existing knowledge and bringing in technology to improve on what they are doing. So this planning and the aspect of reforestation, I'm one of those who are not advocates for exotic species planting. I prefer, and I don't like the word tree planting, I prefer tree growing. We've planted trillions of trees, but how many of these trees are growing? So we are looking at agroforestry techniques that improve native tree species.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Harrison. You got an applause when you talk about decolonizing technologies. And it looked like that was a strong soundbite, which I would then build on that to ask Alice. From what we are hearing, right? I mean, because we need to really dig down on these nature-based solutions, leveraging that to drive transformational adaptation. There seems to be a disconnect from the grant. The bottom doesn't meet the top. Whether it is policy seems to be operating on its own space, the action seems to be operating on their own space. So how do we connect the ladder from the ground to the top, knowing that the people on the ground know what they want and know how to do it, but just need a little bit of a push to move to the top in terms of opportunities within leveraging nature-based solutions? Have you guys, and you mentioned you guys are setting up a Pan-African, using Pan-African coalitions to drive this. But from what you are hearing is that, if you heard from all the panelists, is yes, sometimes those coalitions miss at the very people who matter and know it more on the ground. So how are we closing these gaps?
Thank you, Dr. Richard. In fact, in WWF, first of all, we have this climate crowd work that we do with local communities, And with the climate crowd work, we put local communities at the center. We are building from their key adaptation interventions or their key mitigation interventions, and we are bringing them up at the national levels and at the regional levels as well. And another interesting work that we are doing is we are trying to mainstream, nature into key development plans and key regional plans. For example, at the local level, we have community development plans. At the national levels, we have NDCs and our NAPs, and at the regional levels, we have the various development plans of the regional economic communities. So we are looking on how we can really value the role of nature, how we can mainstream nature into these documents to make sure that we drive transformative solutions around that. I would also like to point out the importance of promoting locally led nature-based solutions. It's us in Africa, as I said earlier, it's our culture, it's part of us, and we need to push it wherever we go. And even at the COP, we really need to push, for more locally led adaptation interventions, both regionally and locally.
Excellent, thank you very much, Alice. We need to push for what works and also locally led solutions. This word locally led solutions now is also becoming a buzzword. Not from this panel, but we hear about it everywhere, but it looks like this is more words than action. And it's really great that you guys are emphasizing this. I'll get to you, Dr. Bennett, and my question to you is going to build on what the mayor said. You heard, she said that the privilege, let me use that word guardedly, they are the maker, the shakers and movers, so to speak. And then those who are not privileged are actually always the victims sometimes, even for things they've not done. So I want to come to you and taking into consideration that you mentioned the word decolonizing curriculum, and you've now heard the word decolonizing nature-based technology, so the word is picking up steam in the room here. But what I want to ask you is that the issue between the socio-economic rights, that is the balance between socio-economic rights of citizens and environmental protection, seems to be a never-ending discussion. So, for example, your institution, the One Ocean Hub, has been looking at the rights of small-scale features assessing the ocean schools in South Africa, after the area was established as a marine protector. So, in your view, in 2 minutes, what needs to be done to balance these competing rights? Because it's a big issue. The right to protect, the right to give opportunity to those who are privileged, and at the same time, the debate continuously moves ahead, but there seems to be no solution. What do you think can be done?
So I think there are different approaches, and very key is actually understanding that we're working in a very complex system, and we need to link and couple these systems. And so using social ecological systems lenses do that. We cannot separate socio-economic well-being of humans away from nature. That's the first step. Is our rhetoric in our conversation needs to always link the two. So from our perspective, oceans and climate are inextricably linked and should never be separated. And the same as with food systems, whether they're fisheries within the oceans or inland fisheries or agriculture, that's the very first step. The second is also to understand that it's a human right, and there's a difference between these soft laws and hard laws, and I liked the word, in the questioning about accountability. We are accountable, and we should be held accountable to all voices, and they all have a right to a healthy environment. And healthy environments ensure and secure sustainable and healthy social societies, also from a social cohesion perspective, from a mental health perspective, from a livelihood and poverty alleviation perspective. And we need to understand that and find those particular mechanisms and pathways. And then lastly, I think we need to also stop listening to the squeaky wheel. And we need to be able to, and the squeaky wheel, I mean, it's that, as I also use the word guarded, privileged, because we need to always understand that there is a power dynamics, and we assign legitimacy, sometimes even through our research or through these conversations, we're already assigning power to a group of people. And we need to actually understand these power dynamics and see how we can transform and change these power dynamics and ensure legitimacy is then awarded for people to be able to speak up. And if we're going to speak up as Africa at COP, we need to understand that we need to shift the power is in the hands of Africa to be able to do that and come up with those solutions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Benedict, for those insightful words. We're now going to take inputs and comments. It should not always be questions. If you have inputs, please put your hand up, and if you have a question, you put a hand up. So, because I was taught by my primary school teacher that anybody who asks a question knows the answer. The only thing he's doing is to validate whether what he knows is right. But please feel free. So we'll take 3 questions, and then I'll bring that to the panel, please, to answer. Then I'll get back to you, and then I'll give room to the panelists again to answer.
Thank you. Hi.
Your name, please, and then your question.
Thank you. I'm Jillian Connors-Felopolsky. I'm with the Clean Cooking Alliance. And I'd be curious to hear from our panelists how many of your organizations are involved in clean cooking interventions that are linked to nature-based solutions, with 34% of fuel wood being harvested unsustainably in biodiversity hotspots around the world, providing fuel for 2.4 million people without access to clean cooking. How do we take people-centered solutions like accelerating access to clean cooking and embed those in nature-based solutions and climate programs?
That looks a loaded question, so maybe just summarize it. You guys have some very excellent parts in it, so maybe just summarize it. So I think our question, you take others, but let me summarize it because it has implications. Very important implications. People-centered solutions vis-a-vis the gas debate versus actions that have nothing to do with gas but providing clean solutions to people. Is that correct?
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Milion Balay. I'm from the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, the biggest and largest network in Africa. I come from a group which actually opposes nature-based solutions.
Why?
Because one, it's not clearly defined, it's not clear. And sometimes we see it as a solution co-opted by corporations, big corporations who want to promote carbon offsetting mechanisms, tree planting in community lands, promoting industrial agriculture. Because I remember in COP27 in Spain, and I shared the company, one of the companies that's huge supporting the environment, putting a big flag like nature.
Just go straight to the question so that we can say something.
Yes, that's a problematic concept. And I really like some of the comments that are from the stage and also from the lady. I know, but we're speaking virtually. So what is the source of this concept? What is relevance to Africa? I think nature has much more value than money. We value for so many things.
I think we've got your question. Thank you very much for that. What is the source of this concept and what's the value? The panelists, they are going to decongest that in a few minutes from now. The last question, please, then we will answer those 3, or we can take 5 and then answer those before we get back.
Merci, je parle en français.
Allez-y.
Je suis Khatari Mbaye, je suis du Sénégal. Je suis le coordonnateur du GES Small Grand Programme qui soutient les initiatives communautaires de protection de l'environnement. J'ai écouté tout le monde
Et je pense que les communautés ont plus besoin d'influencer les politiques. Or, pour influencer les politiques, à partir d'une action ou d'un résultat d'une action communautaire à la base, on ne peut pas le faire de manière théorique. Il faut prouver effectivement que les communautés ont des solutions plus pratiques et se démontrer que c'est efficace pour que ces justement solutions basées sur la nature puissent être intégrées dans les politiques, prises en compte par les organes de décision. Or, pour que ces communautés puissent faire valoir leur voix, ils ont besoin de soutien. Et notre programme, le second grand programme qui existe pratiquement dans tous les pays africains, est en train de travailler sur ça. Au Sénégal, nous avons un réseau de communautés qui ont été appuyées, qui ont fait des résultats. Et actuellement, quand le ministère de l'Environnement, par exemple, élabore le code de l'environnement, il intègre certaines pratiques ou bien il appelle même ces communautés pour entendre leur contribution. C'est juste une contribution que je fais pour dire que dans vos pays respectifs, vous avez le gestion d'un programme qui faut vous appuyer et à partir de vos résultats, vous faites l'influence des politiques.
Thank you very much, merci beaucoup. The last question, please, then we get back to the panelists. This is getting exciting, isn't it? Yeah.
Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis Claude Elmi Marangam Kaji et je travaille dans une ONG environnementale basée à Mouila, c'est dans le sud-ouest du Gabon. Donc notre ONG milite pour la protection des intérêts des communautés locales. Et pour ce qui est des solutions basées sur la nature, nous avons remarqué que certains projets qui sont menés dans l'environnement de ces communautés apportent beaucoup de restrictions à ces communautés. Alors, est-ce que ce sont vraiment des solutions ou finalement elles viennent encore mettre un peu plus elles viennent encore créer un peu plus de limites, de contraintes aux communautés locales? Donc, ça complique encore plus leurs conditions de vie qui ne sont pas déjà les meilleures parce que les communautés locales ne sont pas souvent les communautés les plus aisées ou les plus...
Merci beaucoup. Yes, what I'm going to do, in no particular order, please provide your perspective to the questions. But I will start with Benedict, who is online. Benedict, please, in 2 minutes, throw some light to some of the questions. I think you got all of them, so that at least we can save some time, because I think we have about 15 minutes remaining and I want us to really cover some ground. Yes, over to you, Benedict.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, the French questions, I don't have those fancy headphones to help
just
the
go ahead
translations.
with the ones you understood.
But I'm going to, I think, address maybe a little bit from the clean cooking perspective. And I don't have any knowledge of that, and it's not something that we incorporate. So that's a direct, answer to part of the question. But one of the things that it's taking the solutions to instead of working together for solutions towards clean cooking. And already there are excellent clean cooking innovations within Africa that exist and are produced locally by people who are in different rural communities. And I think that's the starting point. However, I really would like to comment on the question about the Food Sovereignty Alliance, which is really important, and it also links to the Deputy Lord Mayor's very beginning comment about a problem with this valuing and commodification of nature. Now, one of the reasons, this is something that even us as researchers and contributors to policy are to blame for, because we feel the only way we can get nature into policy and the only way we can get value into poverty alleviation and SDGs is through commodifying and putting a dollar sign next to nature. And this has created a problem, and one we are trying to unpack. And I really want to emphasize we need to start unpacking the inherent intangible value of nature to people. And we need to also find those mechanisms and pathways that we no longer have to convince the president that it is important to keep that piece of land because it's got a a value of so many dollars, it's actually got more value if we see it within the system, how it is connected to soil health, how it's connected to water health, how it is connected to infrastructure. You don't have to build additional infrastructure. And these are the kind of things that we need to start looking at. So I really commend that we start re-looking how we don't commodify nature.
Yes, Benedict, thank you very much for that perspective, but I want you to use less than a minute to answer this. There is this question that came up here on the concept. Now, where is it coming from? And that, what would you say on that?
So again, the concept has been emerging from an accounting perspective. It's nature-based solutions that we are commodifying nature. It also is in response to climate and climate change. In other words, we are destroying certain ecosystem services that do provide us with mitigation and protection from climate. For example, coral reefs not only provide food, but they provide a barrier that reduces wave height, as an example. So with increasing sea level rise, we need to ensure that those are there. The same with mangroves and other certain systems. So for me, I agree we need to unpack the term a little bit more deeply. We also need to look at how we describe and how we and where we place the term nature-based solutions. Excellent. But it's also ecological infrastructure. It's all linked.
Thank you very much, Benedict. I will start with you, Alice. You've heard. I can see Harrison is itchy to go up first, but ladies before gentlemen, Alice, you've heard the questions and you've also heard perspectives as well, because there were comments from the colleague from Senegal. What's your take in 2 minutes in answering those questions?
Thank you. So I will just build on what Bernadette was saying around what is really the value of nature-based solutions. I think the man left. I'll look at it from the perspective of climate change and what we are driving at WWF. Because for us, nature-based solution is basically addressing the climate change societal challenge through adaptation and mitigation. And in WWF, mainly through adaptation, we are looking at valuing nature-based solutions through 3 key principles. The first one, by avoiding to harm nature. The second one, by using nature to help people adapt. And the third one, by helping nature itself adapt to climate change.
Yes, let me ask. The Benedict talks about legitimacy and power plays. You guys work across countries, and there's this power play. We cannot run away from it. How do you handle it?
Power play in terms of...
the reality is that the uptake of nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based adaptation happen in communities. And sometimes if you want to protect the wasteland, there are some interests around it, right? Like what the mayor said. These are realities. Have you had an experience in handling such, and what did you guys do in 1 minute?
In fact, what we usually do in terms of climate change adaptation, we are looking at addressing key climate hazards such as flooding. For example, in Madagascar, which is very prone to flooding, we are implementing nature-based solutions for adaptation in the form of mangrove restoration. And in Zambia, prone to droughts, we have also engaged in other nature-based solutions.
Yes, thank you very much. Harrison, her question was very clear. And it was about people-centered solutions. People do not really care what we say when we talk about climate change. I grew up in the northwestern part of Cameroon, and I used to see my mother harvest her crops. They fell, not because they are not harvested, and we go hungry just because she didn't have a way to add value to dry her vegetables. So we end up being hungry, we end up not being able to pay school fees. So the point I want to bring here is, how do we ensure that people don't think of nature-based solutions just as planting trees, as you said, but as an opportunity to make money beyond just planting trees? How do you do that? Or have you done it? And how do you make that? Because that seems not to be at the center stage.
For some of those who are in my session a few days ago, where we talked about adding value, there is value chain development and agricultural production, where we supported some farmers on improving income within the same space and not destroying the forest. With her question, I want to say, as a conservationist, around protected areas, we have the approach where we educate the community. People, because we are all human, nobody wants to suffer. The firewood that we're talking about, most women have eye problems and the rest because of that. If they're innovative, they don't want it. But at the same time, how do you go about it? How do you adapt it to suit? And that is why energy-saving fire sites like we're talking about are interesting. And in most communities in Cameroon now, they are accepting that. And it helps in protecting the forest resources.
Yes, Harrison, I'm going to push you on that. Then I move to the mayor now, because so this is the point. If you plant 1 million trees and 3 million are chopped off, then you have done nothing, right? This is reality. So why are people not incentivized to think alternatives? For example, if you are planting trees and they are being chopped down for charcoal, why is the narrative not about helping people to turn waste to briquettes so that they take off the pressure from cutting down trees and at the same time devise enterprising solutions? Where are we getting it wrong?
I think the problem lies with information sharing. We need to improve, and like the approaches we are using, we bring the aspect of multi-stakeholder dialogue, within which the stakes of every stakeholder or interest of every stakeholder is taken into account, and we have a common ground for decision making. And by so doing, that's why like the lady asked the question about questions and projects are coming into communities that are not adaptable to the community people don't accept it.
So how can
the community people don't accept some of this project because we sit in our offices and design projects for the community. We think for the community.
So how do
and that is why the approach in my organization we use the approach of community participation mapping, where we document their land uses and their resource usage. Now, in doing that, blending in with communal development plans that capture community projects, you tend to understand the interests of the community, and you design your project tailoring that and match it with the innovative technologies and the conventions that the government have signed to get international programs moving. So you blend the two. It is not like a standalone. It is more of a blend with community, and that's why I keep talking about bottom top and top-bottom. There must be a point of convergence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harrison. I love the passion you articulated. That yes, Deputy Mayor, you have the power. Yes, you do have power because you are a deputy mayor, and you are working with the communities. You are designing plans and strategies that can help change their life. You heard the question, people-centered actions. You heard the input from politics. You even heard the questioning of the NBS. Maybe what I would like to hear from you is that, yes, the policies are there, they're being made every day, but the problem is always in implementation. So what can mayors do differently? Because from what Harrison is saying, that is where the rubber meets the road, right? The communities are where the rubber meets the road, and mayors are closer to those people. So in taking into consideration their questions, can you be able to throw some light on that?
Well, do I have the power? I think for so many years as political leaders in Kampala, and especially us from the opposition side, have been fighting to regain our power. And I can assure everyone here that we shall continue fighting to regain that power.
So do you have the power?
We are fighting to regain the power. But with the support of the people, we have some power. And it's because of those people that we are able to come up with policies. Now, you've talked about policies, having the policies in place, and what we lack is the implementation strategy. You find, yes, there are a number of policies in books, there are a number of policies about climate change, but there is no implementation strategy. So for me, as long as the policymakers come up with the strategies on how to implement, then definitely we are going to see some things changing. And I've heard people talk about sensitization. And to me, the question is, what kind of sensitization are we talking about? What people are we sensitizing? Are we sensitizing the right people? And allow me to tell you just a brief story. The other day, I hope I can. I went back home and I found when my dad had cut down the trees. And because he cut down the trees, because the trees had hit my car. So he expected me when I come back home, I was going to be very happy and hug him. You get it? So me as the Lord Mayor, I have been sensitized, you know? But there is this group of people, the guards, the maids, that actually stay at home and they are keeping our homes that we are leaving behind. And of course, when you're talking about all these things, promoting tourism, blah, 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 at the end of the day, what are the local communities benefiting? We say a lot of money is coming from tourism, but when you're going to visit a tourism site, you'll find that even the roads are not constructed. So at the end of the day, it will become very difficult for you to convince the local communities that they have to preserve the environment, when at the end of the day, they do not see anything tangible, when they do not directly benefit from there.
Yeah, good one, but before I get to Richard, I just want your perspective on you've mentioned some very important aspects there. We cannot drive any action without having the public-private sector partnership. Have you, maybe through your work as a deputy mayor, engaged local private actors to work with the mayor, and have there been any results? What we need to help?
Oh, definitely. We believe in partnerships. And we have made quite a number of private-public partnerships in as far as preserving the environment is concerned. We also have organizations, international organizations. We have Expertise France, which has really played a very fundamental role. I had my sister here asking about clean cooking, and you know they have really played a very significant role, I could say, because if you look at Uganda, you'll find that at least more than 80% of the population there is relying on firewood. It's also relying on charcoal. Good. And to make matters worse, you even go to government institutions like schools, hospitals, prisons. They are using charcoal as well.
So the good point is you have engaged them, and the last is how you engaging youth. 30 seconds, then I'm going to reach it.
Well, I'm a youth myself, much as I'm the Deputy Lord Mayor. So in everything that I do, youths, women, PWDs come first, and that discussion is going to that discussion and those engagements are going to continue ongoing.
Excellent. Yes, Richard, thank you very much, Deputy Lord Mayor. Yes, Richard, you heard the questions. What's your take in 2 minutes?
Yes, I want to share some of the actions that we are doing in the clean cooking sector. Now, one of the challenges that we realize is that the improved cook stoves that we have are imported, and they use briquettes and these advanced fuels, which are not accessible to the local people, and they still resort to the forest for firewood. We have come with a technology which is local, which is a cook stove implant that the locals put in their traditional mud stove, is able to save them 68% of wood fuel and also 86% of black carbon emissions. And we support them by setting up sustainable woodlot systems to provide firewood for them rather than go to the natural forest for firewood. And these are locally led innovations that are supporting the clean cooking sector.
Yeah, let me just ask a quick question there. If these locally led innovations are happening, why are they always in meetings and conferences spoken as if they've never happened? Is it that the communication and the bringing that to the fore is not happening by you guys?
It's because people are trying to promote foreign businesses that are into this clean cooking sector with these innovations, these briquettes. We also have a program to support.
So how can we be able to make sure that we have a level playing field?
One of the things is to bring the locals to the conversation so that we can look at how we can bridge the gap. As my brother mentioned, the top-down and bottom-up approach needs to happen.
Who should do that?
Well, we have to do that. We as young people, we are advocating for that. The government has its role to play. The private sector has its role to play to ensure that there's that effective collaboration to have the issue.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Everyone have a role to play, Roland. Do you really think everyone is having a role? Everyone is playing a role based on the questions. I mean, you are going to answer them. Is everybody playing his part, including individual citizens?
Sure, Richard. I prepared some things in my head while you were speaking. Now you've changed the flipped the table on me. We can talk about Kickstarter a little bit later if you want. Actually, what I wanted to just comment on really was this question of whether or not we should be trying to put a price tag on nature, or whether we should be commodifying it in some way. Our friends from Ghana, this last month, the Tewa Nature Reserve. What's happening there? They're going to explore bauxite and just flip their own rules. Uganda has just discovered gold reserves of how many $1 trillion? I can't remember. I don't think, Megan and I are coming from a country which is completely addicted to mineral exploitation. So I don't know that the only solution is to put a price tag on nature, but I think we should accept that there's a war going on. You should arm yourselves. Your adversary is very well organized, very experienced, and knows how to put a value proposition.
Can you elaborate on that? You said there is a war going on.
You can say there's a war going on in nature, and I don't think that we can fight it asymmetrically. I think we need to be able to, it's on us to be able to quantify what is the value of not extracting that bauxite or that gold or that coal, or we're going to lose. That's my personal belief. So do we have a role to play? I don't know, we're trying.
Yes, we are trying, as Ruan has said, Megan. Are we really trying? But without you forgetting to answer the questions that came from the floor.
I think here at Africa Climate Week we've got hundreds and thousands of people joining us online that are here. I think we also just need to take a pragmatic approach and not pretend like we have the perfect solution. Any term with any definition can be implemented in a way that is good or bad for nature. And it would be my take, and this is perhaps more personal belief, that it's about the responsibility of the organization and the individual undertaking that work to do it as best they can in that circumstance and make the best decision in that moment, because there's no perfect decisions. Sometimes I feel we get so caught up in debating terms and terminologies and what they mean that it sometimes hinders us from action. In the clean cooking space, we've got the same conundrums. We're actually doing work now in Freetown. We're hoping to take that forward in Kampala around transition fuels and the ethical dilemma of, do we look at LPG gas as a transition fuel or not? How do we scale what you're speaking about in terms of community interventions? But donors want results. They want thousands of clean cooking interventions implemented tomorrow in the cities for more funding to flow. So it's this balance between being pragmatic and action-oriented, because that's what our cities want. They are frustrated with plans, they're frustrated with talking. I'm frustrated with plans and talking. Being pragmatic, but then always constantly trying to improve, and being real that we're not gonna get it right. Yes, nature-based solutions is maybe not the best term. Maybe the definition needs to be improved, but it's something. It's a step in the right direction.
Excellent. Wow. Please give a round of applause to the panelists. What I'm going to do now, because we have about 7 minutes, I'll take 2 questions and then get back to the panelists, and they will answer those questions as their round of, with their last word. And I will start with Benedict. When we come back, I will start with Benedict, who has been very, very dedicated with us online, and our technology hasn't let us down. So please, if you want to ask a question in 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Ian Redden. So many points have been raised that I don't know which question to ask. If you have organic waste in cities, why don't you use a biogas digester and produce biogas? If you're concerned about the definition of nature-based solutions, the definition should be restoring ecosystems. Nature has a value, but at the moment it's only when it's dead. Dead nature is value. Cut a tree down, you can sell the timber. Living tree, not worth anything, unless a tourist comes to look at it. payment for ecosystem services is the answer. And just as a final point, planting trees does not create an ecosystem. Animals create an ecosystem with trees. So if we're not restoring ecosystems and putting the animals back and making those ecosystems more effective, then it's not a solution. It's plantation.
Thank you very much for those inputs. We appreciate. Thank you very much. The point is very clear. Terminologies should not dissuade or give room for anybody not to act, because the reality is, if you act and turn the challenge to an opportunity, you will touch a life, and that should be what matters, not debating over terms, because those terms will keep emerging. Yes?
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone. Mahmoud Born University, Germany. Actually, I have a question about nature restitution. I'm kind of don't feel good to have different definitions for restorations and give it another name, and then try to adopt a Western definition for restoration and try now to implement it in Africa, which it could be implemented, but I have a question for the panelists. What do you think about adopting such concepts into the African lands? And do you think we really need to tolerate it once, or we have to exactly take the experience from the Western? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. A loaded question, which will be answered in the last words of the panelists, because that can be answered even for a day and we'll never have the time. The last slide, then we get back to the panelists. And please, as you answer the question, just give your last word so that we end on time.
Bonjour à tous, je suis Eric Dambo. Voilà, ma question elle est pour quasiment pour tout le monde concernant la décolonisation de l'agriculture. Étant donné que notre agriculture ancestrale est là pour bien fonctionner depuis longtemps déjà, est-ce qu'il ne serait pas question par contre de parler d'une manière hybride en fait, hein, de l'agriculture dont on pratique en Afrique, et l'adapter avec les équipements d'agriculture
Thank you very much for that question. But I don't think anybody said new technologies should not be leveraged. They talk about adaptability of solutions, that they must be contextualized, not implemented as the way that they have been made. I think I will come to you, Benedict. Please, your last word within the context of these questions. If you can take two minutes, that means we'll be like 2 to 20 minutes, which we have only 5. So please try to see what you can do in less than 2 minutes.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for the questions. And yes, it's very difficult in 2 minutes. I think that it's a partnership as well through learning through our mistakes. And just taking things at face value. And I agree we need actions, but we also need to learn from our actions and learn from our mistakes. And I think that's something that I think we need to add. We can't just keep on making mistakes, hoping we've got action. And we have seen this through an absolute waste of funding going into quick action and rolling out things very quickly, which are, wastelands left afterwards and actually more damage, and also breakdown in society has occurred through some of these actions. So I do think there needs to be some planning and careful thinking and also learning from those mistakes. Then in terms of ecosystems, restoration and ecosystem services, I agree, but we also need to be very careful. This does come to definitions. Are we looking at nature, like biomimicry, to provide us with solutions to technology and problems that we may have, or funding? Or are we looking at restoring ecosystems that can provide ecosystem services? And then my last comment is around paying for ecosystem services. I would like to ask who is going to pay, because it's the people who cannot pay who are the ones who suffer the most. Again, you shift the power imbalances on who is paying for the ecosystem services that are being provided. And we really need to look at this very carefully. But I do agree that through ecosystem restoration projects that are from the ground up, that come from communities, can reduce the impact on actual ecosystems and what they offer. It can provide jobs like blue and climate jobs. It can provide certain other solutions that could be rolled out and lessons learned. And I think my very final comment is that we have learned so much just from this panel, and I'm sure throughout this conference. We need to find ways of amplifying the lessons that we're learning from these discussions and taking them out there. Because even the panelists have come up with pathways, they've come up with solutions, they've come up with ideas, they've even come up with little tweaks to definitions. And I think what we need to learn and to do is capture those so that we can progress, so that we can protect nature and people in the process.
Thank you very much, Benedict. That was really excellent. There is a panel that needs to kickstart now, so I have to appreciate you for your time and thank you very much. It was a great pleasure listening to you and you provided wonderful insights. So thank you for staying through with us. We appreciate it. Yes, Alice, I'll give you guys 1 minute because we have to get out of here now, right? So what's your last word?
My last word, as I said, we really need to unify our African voices, especially as we are moving towards COP26.
What's an African voice?
Build one coalition, develop a coalition of key African stakeholders with scientific and indigenous knowledge to push our African priorities on loss and damage, adaptation, to address all the problems.
And nature-based solutions. Excellent. Thank you very much. Yes. Harrison, if it's less than 1 minute, we will be more excited.
I will say we should protect nature and make sure that there is food on the table.
Thank you very much. Food on the table and more money in more pockets. Yes, Deputy Mayor, do you agree with that? And can you say that?
I'll leave with a quotation by Robert Watson. He's the co-chair of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. And he had this to say: while nature provides essential goods and services such as food, flood protection, and many more, it also has rich social, cultural, spiritual, and religious significance, which needs to be valued in policy making as well. People need to better understand the full value of nature to ensure its protection and sustainable use. I personally totally agree with this view.
Wonderful. What a way to give your final word. Amazing. Yes, Richard.
Thank you very much.
Less than a minute.
Nature-based solutions play a critical role in biodiversity conservation, and young people and local communities need to be empowered, supported, and incentivized.
How will they be empowered?
Yes, they need to be empowered.
By who?
By themselves.
Thank you very much.
By government and by private sector.
Thank you very much. And this goes that nobody will give you a table. You have to bring your own table and your chair. If it can even be a folded chair, that's better. Thank you for that. Yes, Roland, your last word.
I don't think anyone here is in disagreement about anything that we've said. I think we're all here because we're interested in the topic and this is the thing that we follow. It's going to be really boring to see each other next year and talk about the same things and say, here's a 2023 already. So I feel like if we've got a year to prepare for the next COP, I think we really need to think of how to take this message outside of the tents.
Thank you very much. We have to take the message outside of this tent so we don't keep on doing the same thing and the same thing again and it will become boring, as Roland has said. Yes, Megan, how are we going to do that before it becomes boring?
What struck me as the most important point, one of them, what we discussed today, is this pressure for action and speed, but the need to do so with evidence and science and not lead to maladaptation, which we've been told has been happening with a lot of climate funds. And how are we going to do that? Through better monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And so, from my perspective, for us to come next year with something more innovative would be a system in which that is operationalizing our monitoring and evaluation and learning. So we are implementing with speed, but doing so in a way that is responsible.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Please give a round of applause to all the amazing panelists. They've done an amazing job, and in 1 hour 30 minutes we have decongested something that has been there for quite a very long time without being decongested. You heard it all, so I'm not going to repeat it, but the one word that stood out was localizing solutions and decolonizing approaches so that at least they can work for people and put more money in more pockets and food on the table. And that is it. Thank you very much for attending.
Yeah.